Hi everyone, I'm Tara Mont, and you're listening to the Trust and Thrive with Tara Mont podcast. I created this podcast along with my blog and brand to hopefully inspire others to live their most authentic life. I truly believe that we all have the power to live a life we love, and to do so, it's so important to be in tune with ourselves and be open to growing and evolving. I believe that once we can trust ourselves and our vision, that's when we can thrive. So with this podcast, I plan to discuss all things to do with self-reflection, personal growth, mindsets, and self-belief, all aspects that affect us in our everyday life. If you feel connected to my message and want to listen more often, I will be sharing one podcast a week, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Welcome back to this week's episode of Trust and Thrive with me, Tara Mont. In honor of Valentine's Week, we will be going in depth on different topics to do with relationships and different attachment styles. I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day, whether you are celebrating with someone or with yourself, with some friends, whatever it is. I hope you are practicing self-love above all else, and really remembering that the relationship you have with yourself is the most important one. So for this week's episode, I actually met in person with this next guest. Her name is Sharon Peykar. Sharon is an associate psychotherapist and life coach. By creating an empathic space for self-discovery and self-acceptance, Sharon helps individuals develop healthy relationships with themselves and others. Sharon aims to help her clients identify their unique strengths and solutions that will help them in creating the life they deserve. She is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara and the USC School of Social Work. She is a trauma-informed clinician who has experience working with individuals experiencing addiction, anxiety, and depression related to relationship stressors, codependency, grief, loss, breakups, and divorce. Sharon offers sessions online or in person, and her office is located in Sherman Oaks, California. So if you would like to connect with Sharon and work with her, I will make sure to include all her information in the description of this episode, like I always do, so that you can either work with her if you're interested or even just follow her Instagram page where she has a lot of amazing insight. So for this episode, I just want to apologize in advance because although we met in person and the quality is usually a lot better when you meet in person, there is going to be noise, background noise of the AC going on. And so that's just a mistake on my part. I was annoyed about it at first with myself that I didn't really think about it as much and I didn't adjust the levels maybe in the way I should have or didn't turn off the AC, but that's okay. We live and we learn. And at the end of the day, it's all about the quality of content, and what Sharon has to say is so insightful and so relatable. So even if there is some noise in the background, hopefully it'll be something you can get used to. It's really not that bad. So I just wanted to let you know in advance. I apologize for that. With that said, I can't wait to share what Sharon has to say with you because it's really a great episode. I think there's so many important topics we touch on, from different attachment styles, codependency, how trauma and limiting beliefs from our childhood relate to our relationships today, self-worth, different roles that we may play in relationships. There's so much in this episode. If you'd like to give Sharon a follow on Instagram, you can find her at Sit with Sharon. I will include all her other information in the description. Like I say with every episode that has to do with relationships, it's never about just being with someone or being a couple. These episodes are for everyone because a lot of what we talk about is self-work and inner work and how that affects every relationship in our life. And Sharon can even agree with that in this interview. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful Valentine's Day, Valentine's Week, however it makes you feel. I just hope you feel loved by yourself before anything. So with that said, let's get right into it with Sharon. So I'm here with Sharon right now.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. So can you start off telling us a little more about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Sharon Peykar. I am a psychotherapist and a life coach based out of Los Angeles, and I work in private practice.
Awesome. And so I'm curious as to what inspired you to start your Instagram page, because that's obviously how I found you. And I know you're helping a lot of people through there. So what inspired you to put your work out there?
Yeah, so working in private practice, I felt like I wanted to share my work with more people. And I knew that the patterns and the themes that were coming up among my clients were coming up for many people. And I wanted to spread the knowledge that I had learned, out into the world and just reach more people.
Overall, I want to get into like what you specifically focus on. Do you focus more on relationships, like romantic, platonic? What do you really focus on with your work?
So most of the people that come to me are looking for support in romantic relationships, whether it is going through a breakup, going through a divorce, navigating dating, breaking up and getting back together with someone and feeling like they're not really sure what to do. So a lot of romantic relationship issues come up, and also family issues, patterns of relating with family members who maybe they need to have more boundaries with, or they're enmeshed in their boundaries, meaning it's like not clear where one's role ends and the other one begins. And they just want clarity on how to navigate that better.
Mm-hmm. And have you noticed, because I feel like it's so easy to like blame other people, whether it is a romantic relationship or like with your family, just say it's their fault and that's why we're not working out, like just put the blame on someone else. Have you noticed that most people who do that like have a specific pattern where, it's everyone's fault and not just their own? It's the stuff that they maybe have to work through.
I think a lot of my clients reach a place where they've realized they are responsible. And I think for, many of them, it's common, right, to blame other people. But at the end of the day, as an adult, there's a sacred responsibility of really looking at yourself and what you're bringing into your relationships and doing the work.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's good to hear. And so I'm really interested in the whole idea of secure attachment, because I know you talk a lot about that on your Instagram too. So can you talk about the difference between secure attachment and codependency? Because I feel like most people wouldn't, can't really tell what the difference is between those if they're not educated on that.
Yeah, so the main difference is secure attachment it's a theory that is used to explain how we connect with others and how we feel around other people, whereas codependency is more of a behavioral pattern of dependence where, a person is looking for their sense of self and their safety and their identity and their self-worth in other people. So going back to attachment, it's kind of like there's a spectrum of avoidant attached, secure attached, and anxious, it's very fluid. It's very depending on our relationships, like we can kind of shift back and forth. And we can certainly have codependent traits within anxious attachment or avoidant. But, codependency is more of like a behavioral pattern, and it's a pattern of searching for yourself in other people and using relationships to fill a void of perhaps like emptiness or identity.
Cool. And so have you noticed that a lot of that comes from childhood? Is that something like people who maybe are more codependent in that way, maybe it's like a pattern they've noticed or something happened with their parents or their guardians that's made them feel that way?
Definitely. So when I see codependence, it is a trauma response. I see it as a learned pattern of trying to relate to other people. So let's say, you came from a family where you didn't feel like there was an authentic connection or intention of really your family getting to know you, and there isn't really an authentic bond there. That emptiness and that loneliness that a child might feel is then carried out into other relationships, and they might find themselves using other people as a way of trying to fill that feeling of emptiness and of loneliness.
Mm-hmm. And do you think like that relates to certain roles we feel like we need to fit, whether we grew up being like a people pleaser or we grew up just feeling the need to fit a specific role to feel validated and loved? Do you notice that a lot? Is that something you work with your clients, like kind of talking your inner child?
I do. I see a lot of just refusing to set boundaries. A lot of people who struggle with the idea that if I am setting boundaries, I'm somehow being selfish, or, that I'm going to lose this relationship. They're going to abandon me if I speak up for what I need. And I think particularly for women, how that shows up in a lot of relationships is spending a lot of time teaching your partner how to treat you, and, how to be, and your sense of self really is dependent on their actions or their inactions, meaning I see their capability to change and their willingness to change as a measure of how worthy I am of love and how valuable I am as a person.
Mm-hmm. Like the whole idea of being the savior, I imagine. Like, I feel like I've seen that in my life in many ways. And so do you think when it comes to romantic relationships, for example, with codependency, is it like two people who are codependent attract each other, or is there like a specific dynamic of how that works?
Well, I think it shows up in many different ways. Codependent people will often attract someone who similarly had like a dynamic during their childhood where their needs for being seen and heard and validated perhaps were not met. So I see a lot of codependent partnerships where the other partner might have some narcissistic traits. And the idea, the cycle that I see is, one partner trying to change the other, trying to save the other, trying to get him to see how toxic his behavior is, much like the way they would have liked for their parent or their family to change so that they would feel safer and less alone. It really can seem like a reenactment sometimes of a parent-child dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so interesting because I've heard too, like, even in my own life, there's certain things that I think if I change within, for example, I love my parents, but obviously like no parent is perfect. And if there's something that bothers me and I want to change it about them, I think that's going to change it within me, if that makes sense. And so like that whole idea of controlling others kind of fulfills you in that way, even though you can only work on yourself. Now, when it comes to secure attachment, would you say that's a healthier way to feel? I'm just curious. I don't really know too much on secure attachment.
Yeah, so I would say that there are secure functioning behaviors that we can all learn. And I was making this analogy, in a session earlier with a client that was like, the healthy relationship isn't the one that doesn't have conflict. It's the one where we're able to see each other and hear each other and collaborate to come up with a solution. So I don't feel resentment towards you. And you don't feel like I'm withholding like from the other partner. So there's a collaborative element where both people are active participants, whether it's I want to be curious about my partner's triggers or their feelings or their inner world. I'm noticing the other person's, overwhelm, and I respect their space and I give them what they need. If it's time, if it's space to kind of just come to a place of safety, I ask them what they need. There's a very collaborative sense of problem solving when there is conflict.
Mm-hmm. And what's like the fine line? I feel like there's such a fine line when it comes to, no one's fully evolved. We're like constantly changing. We all have our issues. We all have things we're working on. And so like, how can you tell the difference between just being with someone where you're both working to be better and there's obviously issues, and then this is just like unhealthy and not my responsibility?
Right. I would say I put the focus more on what am I internally experiencing in this relationship? How much time do I spend obsessing or, fantasizing about my needs being met? That is an indicator of it might be time to kind of distance myself from this and really look at what version of me shows up when I am in relationship with this person. I think one of the biggest things about codependency is like one partner is looking to the other to make them feel good and worthy at all times. And I don't know that that's necessarily possible, right? We're going to have moments of conflict and of tension, and it's one thing if it's chronic tension all the time, but it's another if we're able to manage it and get through it in ways that help us move towards each other and in an intimate way. Mm-hmm. And I think for every person that looks different.
Yeah. And I'm glad you say it looks different for everyone, because I feel obviously we need to have like certain expectations and needs met, but I feel like these days there's so many unrealistic expectations, even just with social media and what we see, because we see those highlight reels. So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to like, what are your thoughts on people like maybe having these unrealistic expectations, which make them like, it's hard to tell sometimes, like, am I getting are my needs not being met, or are my expectations just so like out of reach and not realistic?
That's a great question. I think that sometimes the unrealistic expectations can be a mask for avoiding intimacy. I think of, my clients who are extremely love avoidant and will find any reason to not go out with someone. And in some ways, those unrealistic expectations, they work for them, right? Because they're protective and it keeps them safe and it keeps them from getting hurt. But at some point, it does become sort of stifling, right?
And it can be like self-sabotage, I imagine, because even for me, like, I'm in my first relationship, but it's been going really well, and part of me thinks like, oh, something must be wrong that it's only my first relationship. And like, I know people who've had to go through like 5 or multiple to find the one, that kind of thing, where I overthink it and I would find issues that weren't really there just to have a problem, like make it feel like there was a reason to. So do you feel like self-sabotage is like a big part, or something that many people experience in relationships, just for any reason? I know it's different for everyone.
Definitely. I mean, there are so many constructs as women, right, that we have. By a certain age, we should be blank, we should have blank. And a lot of the time, I think those constructs set us up for unhealthy relationships. The work that I do with people who identify with codependency is I ask them, like, what were the core beliefs you held growing up about what it means to be in a relationship, right? What does that say about me that I am in one or that I'm not? And what would make my life meaningful with or without that partner?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think we often see like the dynamics that like around us. Obviously we see how our parents were, we like, that's how we define love. And so for someone who maybe didn't grow up in an environment where they feel like it's an ideal image of love, or they don't really know what a healthy dynamic looks like what advice would you give to them to kind of explore that on their own?
Yeah, so it's very common actually. Codependency can come from being in a family where there was addiction or dysfunction of any kind. And I see that with people who kind of tend to place others either on a pedestal or see others as above them, that they may have grown up experiencing trauma. And because of that, they see themselves as separate. They see themselves as different. And in every social interaction they enter, they're like placing themselves below other people, whether it's a romantic or, friend situation. There's just this need to create a hierarchy of, you are better than me, or I am beneath you because of what I've been through. And that can attract really one-sided, imbalanced relationships. I think it's really important to look at childhood, and I might be a little biased, but work with a therapist who, does have an understanding of trauma and how it impairs you and your relationships in some way. And then you have the flip side of that of kids who grow up in families where it's like, we are better than other families, or we can't really be seen or talk to that family because we're, there's a sort of grandiosity, or reputation is so important. And that creates the opposite end of that spectrum, which is I see myself as above others, right? I see myself as maybe capable of changing other people. When I enter a relationship, I can fix them, I can rescue them. All of these things are rooted in families where perhaps the boundaries weren't super clear. There was a lot of enmeshment. There was an emphasis on external qualities, external accomplishments, rather than growing, developing internal safety and, inner child, getting to know the inner child. I mean, most of these things just weren't advocated for in families. We didn't grow up with the idea that we had an inner child inside of us. And so it's really important, I think, to do the work and get to know what that child needed that perhaps was missing and is now being played out in your relationships.
And I'm glad you mentioned like whole families in general, because it's easy to say like, oh, we just look at our parents or like relationships in our lives, but we don't realize like our culture, obviously, like the generations around us. And I find that so interesting because, we don't realize maybe like we live with our grandparents, or it's like it could be like a more old school mindset. And even just, I've been listening to a lot of relationship podcasts and how, marriage was for like financial benefit before, it wasn't for love and for that connection, and that slowly over time it's like changing. And I just find that really interesting. I want to go back to secure attachment because I'm really interested. I know you've talked about like the 4 C's of secure attachment. Do you mind going into a little more detail on those?
Yeah, so I actually came up with this as I was exploring with a client a better way of counteracting avoidant behaviors. And it seems like so much of avoidant attachment is just using any reason to run away. And I wanted to help her understand that we can run towards in a way that is safe. And that would require us to get curious about our inner experience and about our partner's inner experience, to know ourselves with clarity and to know what our needs are, to know what our boundaries are and our non-negotiables, creating safety, which means I am honoring my boundaries and what makes me feel safe, and when I need to perhaps step away from a conversation if it's getting too heated, or if I'm noticing the other person is getting too angry and it makes me uncomfortable, I advocate for my safety. And I'm collaborative. I'm willing to, whether it's reach out to my partner when I need to speak up about something, or if it's reaching out to someone else or a therapist, I'm willing to bring in safe, trusted people and helping me resolve some of my relationship challenges.
I think safety is so important, and it's something I feel like we forget to talk about, but I'm just interested in like how common it is for someone to feel, or just in general, like sometimes we feel unsafe because, like you said, it's our inner child, or like our partner can be perfect, they could be doing all the right things in our eyes, but we still feel unsafe, or it's an insecurity we have. So is that something you work with your clients? Like, is this your own internal demon speaking to you, or is this something maybe you have a reason to feel this way from your partner?
Yeah, I'll ask my clients to sort of travel back in time with me and identify the first time they felt that way, that they're feeling that insecurity or that doubt. And usually they're able to trace it back to an incident, and we get curious on like, what do I think I needed at that time? What did I need to hear? What would have been helpful for me? And how can I introduce that to myself now as an adult? What would that mean? What would that look like? And of course, in any situation, if there is any form of emotional abuse or physical abuse, sexual abuse, that's not, we wouldn't introduce that, and we would deal with that a little bit differently. But I think a lot of the time it is past triggers that come up, right? Or self-sabotaging that comes up in relationships. And, most people just simply don't know how to create a relationship that is securely functioning. So of course there's nothing wrong with seeking tools and doing the inner child work. It's actually, I'm really impressed by the amount of people who are like curious about this, because secure attachment, this theory goes back so many years. So I think it's awesome.
And I think it's amazing because it's so, like we talked about, so easy to blame other people, say, oh, I just haven't found the right one, or, I've been in different relationships. And yeah, sometimes it's the case, you have to experience it. But then sometimes it's internal work that people don't do, and then they just continue that pattern of like either self-sabotaging or blaming the other person, or something happens in that way. So how do you how do people, like, how can they start to notice a pattern in their relationship if they're not used to it, if they're not even like aware of this topic, or they don't think about that? Like, how can they start to notice, like, okay, maybe this isn't the person I'm with. Maybe this is me, or it's a specific pattern I've been sticking to that I need to change.
Mm-hmm. I think what I like to ask people is, what are the qualities that you're looking for most in another person? And do you embody that yourself? Focus less on the other person and more on the version of you that shows up in every relationship. Do you like who you were in that relationship? What are the things that you have to do to embody the qualities of someone that you would be willing to date? How can you focus on becoming that person? And that kind of helps people, I think, take their power back.
And I just find it fascinating that like we put so much pressure on this one person in our life when we have like so many other relationships, like friendships and family dynamics. Like, my partner has to be my therapist, and my doctor, like my best friend, they have to be everything. We put this person on a pedestal as if they have to fill all our needs, which, I've over time realized shouldn't be the case. And so why do you think, even though it's our partner and it's maybe the person we spend the rest of our lives with, you may be in a polyamorous relationship, so it just depends on the person, but why do you think we put so much pressure on this one person to fill these needs when we have so many different relationships in our lives?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we might see a potential partner as an idealized savior, right? The person that we wished would have stepped in during our childhood and rescued us from whatever was going on. And in a sense, putting all of the unresolved needs that we had onto this one person, because a lot of it is what society constructs partnership and relationships as, right? So there's so many layers to it, but just kind of to put it in a nutshell, yeah, I think that's kind of where it starts.
I know in general we've talked about like self-esteem and self-worth, but how important do you believe it is for someone to really, we talked about the inner work and focusing on yourself, but it's so easy to put that on the back burner and be like, okay, I want to save this person, or I want to be there for them. And then there's also the opposite, where we don't really meet our partner's needs because we're only focused on ourselves in that way, when we also have to have that balance. So what would you say is like the healthy balance of being there for yourself, working on yourself, and also being like a partner that they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it goes back to, every person has different needs, right? Knowing what yours are specifically, knowing what is not negotiable for you in a relationship of yourself, right? So maybe it's, for example, I will not sleep over 4 nights in a row because I know what I need. I need to get to work on time. I know I need my belongings, whatever that is. It's knowing what is not going to work for you, and knowing what version of you brings out the best in you, right? Like, I know I need at least 2 yoga classes a week. And that's why I think the C, the clarity, and the 4 C's is so important, because only I can really do that work, and I'm responsible for doing that work. No one can tell me, right, what the best version of me, what that would look like and feel like, until I'm able to define it for myself.
I want to talk about like being single, because I talk a lot about like obviously being in a relationship, but for someone who is single and maybe they've been in relationships for like years on end, or they just got out of a long relationship, what advice would you give to someone who isn't used to being on their own, and maybe they didn't even realize they didn't know who they were without their partner?
So my best advice is to date yourself. Really get to know you the way that you would a potential partner. If that means going out by yourself, hanging out at a cafe, taking yourself on dates, do it. This is probably the only period of your time where I'm assuming, for women in their early 20s, late 20s, perhaps you don't have kids, right? You may not get this time back once children are in the mix. Why not spend this time really loving yourself inside out, right? Loving yourself the way that you would want someone else to do for you.
How important do you believe it is to have different relationships? Like, we talked about like not having that one person fill every need, but having different relationships, like for that support in general, just like human connection. I think we forget how important that is, and it's so easy to get in romantic relationship, and I've seen that where people forget about all their friends, or they kind of fall off the face of the earth, and it can happen either way. But how vital do you think it is to balance that out and make time for everyone and not get like so involved where you forget to nourish those other relationships?
Right. I think that having other relationships is necessary in order to have a healthy relationship. I think we need to have boundaries around like not losing ourselves in relationships, and that means respecting the other person's desire to have time with their friends and maintaining, your own friendships as well. I think that the people who unfortunately fall into the most toxic and abusive relationships are unfortunately the ones who don't have that strong community of friends behind them to kind of help them see when things aren't going right, or when there might be some form of conflict in the relationship. They don't have anyone to kind of talk to about it and say like, hey, this weird thing happened, I need to process this, and then all of that kind of lands on the partner that you're with, and they can't fulfill every role.
Mm-hmm.
They can't be your everything, and it kind of sets us up to fail in relationships. So I think the more we can expand and embrace community, like, it's really important.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, I think it's just good to have other people to talk to about that, because when you're in a relationship, even like a friendship, whatever it is, like, it's so easy to feel crazy, or that you're wrong, or maybe the other person is manipulative, or like they're gaslighting you, and
Right.
It's very easy to fall in that and not see it yourself. So I think that's so vital. And I've talked about the whole idea of gaslighting in another episode recently, but I'd love to hear your take on it and how you would define gaslighting.
Yeah, so gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person is inciting in us a feeling of confusion to derail us from what might really be happening. I think sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it is completely out of, not knowing any better. It is intertwined a lot of the time with narcissism and other personality disorders. I see gaslighting a lot in my practice, and relationships where women aren't able to end a relationship for good. They're confused. Like, that's one of the perpetual signs, is like they're just always feeling confused and second guessing, and can't tell the difference between reality and what might be made up.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that is because that person wants control of a relationship, or they're insecure? What does that usually root from?
Yeah, usually it's a projection of trying to maintain an upper hand, trying to maintain control of the relationship. And again, sometimes it's completely like a learned behavior that a person picked up in their family to try to, again, like, maintain control. But it is like an avoidance tactic, right? Like, if you're not able to take accountability, that's a sign of it. You're gaslighting other people.
Mm-hmm. And how, like, I know we talked about having friends and people around you to notice these patterns, but say for someone who doesn't even realize it might not even be gaslighting. I think it's so easy to look at abuse through the lens of what we see in the media, like, either really physical or major verbal, but we don't realize there's so many ways a relationship can be toxic or unhealthy.
Yes.
And so how are some ways we can maybe notice those patterns?
Yeah, I mean, emotional abuse is so insidious. I think if you are someone who is feeling perpetually confused, you feel like you're on a roller coaster, you feel like you don't know how you're feeling, or intuitively your gut is just giving you this like feeling of like, this isn't right. Again, I always say, like, look internally. If you're spending most of your time feeling obsessed or in fantasy, these are signs that something is up, right? Your needs aren't being met, because a healthy relationship does not leave you feeling like a crazy person.
Mm-hmm. And so I know we talked a lot about some like dark parts of relationships, but I also want to talk about like the good. And I want this hopefully to be like a Valentine's Day episode, so bringing that positivity too. So overall, what do you think are some, what would you classify as a healthy relationship, basically? Like when it comes to communication and respect, like what overall, how would you define that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all goes back to your values and what you're looking to get out of being in a relationship. I would say communication, safety, intimacy, friendship, right? If I don't see myself being friends with this person, then probably shouldn't be in a relationship with them. Kindness, generosity, right? Look at how have they created safety for me? Like how have they been reliable, dependable, stable, shown up for me on a consistent basis over time? How do I feel internally when I'm in their presence? Do I feel like I can be who I am? Do I feel like I need to be who they want me to be in order for the relationship to sustain itself? And a lot of the time, like, not to go into the dark side again.
No,
but
it's okay.
just
Please do.
That's so common for me is I see a lot of men and women over medicating or self-medicating, overspending, because their discomfort around intimacy it's just so high. Like they might be drinking a lot to like ease that, or feel like they need to drink on dates, for example. And that's a sign of, perhaps I need to kind of check my intentions for why I'm dating or why I'm in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. And, going back to that too, like I said, everyone's a work in progress, but how do you know when you're ready? Like maybe someone's working through their own personal issue, but they want that connection and they want to be with someone and they're still working through themselves. I don't think we're ever perfect. So how can you tell like you're ready or in the right like headspace to be in a relationship, even though we're all still working to better ourselves?
Yeah, I would say when you're in a place where the relationship isn't a source of, like, I'm not looking for a relationship to feel full and whole. Mm-hmm. I am full and whole as I am as a single person, and this is something that I just want to add to my life. I'm not looking to fill a void, or I'm not doing it out of fear because I am, turning a certain age or because everyone around me is settling down, right? If I'm entering relationships and dating out of fear versus out of a place of genuinely wanting to enjoy the company of another person, I might not be in the best place to date.
And do you see that a lot, that like people feel pressured by their age? I'm sure like even for women, even the obvious fact that they want to have maybe kids by a certain age, and so it's like that rush and that pressure. Is that something you notice often?
I do. I see a lot of women who second guess their relationships but stay in them because there's a fear of going back to dating because of how hard it is. So it's certainly something that we've struggled with as women for a long time, is, well, if I go back out there, I'm gonna have to end up starting over, and I don't want to do that again. And that all, to each their own, right? But to settle, to me, means I see the red flags and I don't really want to talk about them or acknowledge them. I'm more willing to kind of sweep them under the rug and pretend like they don't exist.
And that's always so crazy to me because, like say you see those red flags so early on, but maybe you don't have kids yet or you're not married. It's like, imagine, I don't think people like think that far down the line. And I think because obviously it's an amazing thing that like divorce exists so that you're not like stuck in a relationship you're not happy with. But I also think it makes it like an easy way out because people always think I can leave, or I don't know. I feel like nowadays it's very common to not put in the effort for a relationship and not put in that work because it's easy to leave, in the same sense that it's easy to stay for other people because, like you said, we all value different things, and some people, they want that stability and that matters more than maybe being happy. And then other people, they don't want to put in that work, and so it's easier to just leave and find someone new, and then it happens over and over again. So Do you believe that these days it's easy for people to not put in the work in the same way? Or like obviously people blame others, but it's so easy to, in my opinion, just leave and say, okay, we're past the honeymoon phase and this is not what I expected it to be. And for me, like I went through ups and downs with my boyfriend, but things that we were able to work through that if I just left right away, I would have never known what we could have been. So what are your thoughts on that?
I see that a lot in dating. I think most times by the time that a married couple reaches the point of divorce, I think they have tried. At least, in my experience and my practice and what I see, I think with dating and dating apps, there's this illusion of there's always more, right? People are so disposable. I can just go out and find someone who perhaps isn't going to set quote unquote boundaries with me. And that is very real. But I don't think that it's unique to our time. I think it's always been an issue, whether it was through social media, or perhaps another means of feeling like there's a better deal out there, right? I think when it comes to marriages not working out, the thing that I see the most is like people's intentions for entering a marriage are sometimes more from a place of like a fantasy of what married life will be and could be like and should be like. And I think what they don't see is the reality of we're still going to have the same challenges, except now I'm responsible for another person and legally, right? And so there's this, I think there's a lot of fantasy that is perpetuated on social media around how glamorous it is to be married. And of course, nobody's showing the other end of that, which is, that the first year of marriage can be really difficult, and you're getting to know this person and living with this person that had a probably totally different upbringing than you, and trying to reconcile the differences can sometimes be really hard.
Mm-hmm. And, I agree with what you said. I think a lot of people say, or I've heard a lot of people say, like, people want a wedding. They don't really want a marriage. Yeah. Like, it's like this whole fantasy that people create behind that. And so I find that interesting too, because I've personally had pressure, and I know a lot of people in my life have had that pressure of like hearing other people's stories. Like, I knew right away they were the person I wanted to be with, or I had no doubt, or I 100% knew they were the one. And I think that puts pressure on people because, like any human, I think if you care about yourself and the other person, you're going to not have doubts of like, oh, I really don't want to be with them, but just normal, very like valid doubts of, okay, like, am I doing this for the right reason? Do I want to be here? And like questioning that. So what would you say to people who maybe they can't tell, or like they're having certain doubts, but they can't tell if they're normal or not?
I mean, I would say talk to someone, whether it is like a premarital counseling, like a therapist, or, if it's someone in your place of worship, a church or a synagogue, if there's someone that you can consult with. Because sometimes when we're in a relationship, we don't really see as clearly as those that are outside of it, and they may see things that might take us a little bit longer to see about a person, and be willing to like be curious about, this sort of unbiased source that you're going to, and I would say hear them out, right? Listen to what they have to say. If you trust them, if they are someone, for example, who has the kind of marriage or the kind of relationship that you look up to and that you want, then I think their opinion is worth hearing.
I would ask the same question, but for someone who maybe is in a relationship and they feel like everything's going great, and like we said before, it's easy to sabotage and think, okay, well, this happened to my friend, or this always happens after 10 years. Like, you hear about this story from someone else. Like, what would you tell someone who is already like overthinking and anxious about that, but maybe things are going great and they just have to be present and enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say mindfulness and meditation is probably one of the best tools for navigating anxiety and overthinking. If it's guided visualizations or body scan meditations, anything you can do to keep bringing yourself back into the present moment, and really accepting that we're going to have moments where we're going to have like anxiety and self-doubt around a relationship. I mean, this is one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your life. And if you weren't feeling, to some extent, nervous about it, that might be kind of an issue, right? So know that it's normal, but also there is a spectrum of normalcy within which I might reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm having these thoughts, right? What do you think? Especially if there's someone, again, who has a relationship with the same values as you.
Mm-hmm. And like you said before, I think it all comes down to like knowing yourself and knowing your own values. Because say you talk to one person and they say, oh, you have a doubt, like leave. If you have any doubts, leave.
Right.
Or like it could be the opposite too. So it's really about knowing yourself and what you want. And so I want to ask you, because the whole show is about living your most authentic life, and it's such a different answer for everyone. So I love asking this question. So for you, what does living your most authentic life mean?
I think it means living a life of purpose, being in alignment with my own values, being of service to other people, and helping them reach their highest self.
I love that. And I just want to quickly ask about the love languages. I don't know if that's something you like touch on with your clients, but I think that's just an example that everyone expresses love differently. They feel love differently. You know, maybe you grew up in a household where saying I love you wasn't that common. And so either you can go either way. I think maybe you learn not to say that and that's something you don't do, or you're the opposite where you want to say I love you all the time because you never heard that. And so how important do you believe it is to be empathetic of other people and understand they're showing up in different ways? So to be understanding that we're all so different.
I mean, I think actions speak louder than words, and consistency and stability and reliability over time speaks louder than actions. So if a person is consistently showing you that you are safe with them and you are valued by them, I think that you may have, a solid partnership.
Mm-hmm. And so finally, what advice would you give to couples in general who maybe, I don't know, every once in a while, every week or so, or every month, like, is there something you tell your clients that they can do together, have like a monthly checkup? Like, what advice would you give to them for that?
I do actually. I have a few clients that do relationship check-ins with their partner about what's working, what's not working, what do I want more of, what am I struggling this week, and how can you help me with that? So I'm a huge advocate for that.
Awesome. And then what would you say for someone who's working on themselves and they're not in a relationship right now, or they are in a relationship but with themselves? What would you tell them? Like the same thing, like a checkup every once in a while?
Absolutely. Like what is working in my life? What is working in my favor? What do I need right now to feel loved and seen? How would my life be different if I were in a relationship? And what is stopping me from creating that feeling as a single person? What do I need to do to feel that way as a single person?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think it all comes down to self-reflection, and I appreciate you sharing all of this. Thank you. So I want to finally ask you what's coming up next for you and your work, and where can listeners give you a follow?
Yeah, so I am in private practice in Los Angeles, California, and you can find me on Instagram at sitwithsharon, or my website, sharonpeykar.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. It's been lovely chatting with you in your office and getting to know you more and having a wonderful conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed that one. I hope, like I said before, it wasn't too distracting with the background AC noise. I hope you could still hear Sharon clearly, and I apologize for that again. You live and you learn, and I know how to not let that happen in the future. Podcasts are not always perfect, and I'm very aware of that. All that matters is that you were able to hear what she had to say, because there was so much in there to unpack. So a few topics we touched on. Sharon went into detail about codependency, explaining what that looks like, secure attachment, anxious attachment, all different forms of attachment that she explained. And I really like that she mentioned the obvious fact that any healthy relationship isn't the one that doesn't have conflict. When you're young and maybe you're not as aware of what a relationship requires, you think that any kind of conflict is wrong, when in reality, we all have conflict with anyone, not just romantic partners, but with everyone in our lives, and it's how we deal with it that matters. So Sharon even said the healthy relationship isn't one that doesn't have conflict. It's one in which we collaborate. So how do you work through it? How do you communicate together? And I think that's something you can reflect on with yourself too. How do you deal with internal conflict? Do you try to avoid it? Do you get mad at yourself? Or do you practice self-compassion and try to be kind and realize we're all trying our best? Our partners are trying our best, our friends, our coworkers, our bosses, and even to yourself. Tell yourself, I'm trying my best. And give yourself that love that you would hopefully give to a partner in a healthy relationship. We also talked about unrealistic expectations, of course, with social media, with mainstream media in general, and what we see growing up in TV and movies and books. It's sometimes hard. I asked her that question too. Like, how do you know if this is an unrealistic expectation or if this is just something that you deserve kind of thing? And I think it really all comes down to the question that Sharon mentioned, which is, what am I internally experiencing in this relationship? How am I feeling every day? Am I feeling better about myself? Am I feeling worse about myself? And that comes with all types of relationships. I know we focused mainly on romantic relationships, but this comes down to friendships, like I said, relationships with coworkers. If you're in a friendship and you leave feeling exhausted and low and not good about yourself, that's something to think about. That could be your own insecurity, that could be your own internal work you have to do, or it may be a reflection of how that person is making you feel. It's so imperative to realize that your partner didn't grow up in the same way you did. We all have different upbringings and different backgrounds, and to expect others to express love in the same way or intimacy in the same way is not fair to you, because we're all so different and sometimes people feel safe in different ways. So as we now go into Valentine's Day and there's all this pressure around us, to just buy stuff, at the end of the day, it's a holiday to make money, but there's nothing wrong with celebrating love. I think it's something we should do all the time. I just want to remind you that a lot of what you see isn't real. It's not all parts of a relationship. So don't compare. We talked about this in the episode of comparison. Don't go comparing your relationship in your life to someone else's. So I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you spread love today, tomorrow, every single day. So if you want to follow Sharon to learn more, you can find her on Instagram at sitwithsharon. Her website is sharonpeykar.com, and I will include all that information in the description of the episode, along with my Instagram at tar.mont and the Instagram for the show specifically at Trust and Thrive. So if you haven't subscribed, please make sure to, because it makes it easier. Because I know even just from reading stats that a lot of people who are listening to the show, almost half of you are not subscribed, and it helps you out to subscribe. It's a lot easier. So definitely make sure to do that, whether that's on iTunes, Spotify, and now I'm starting to upload the audio onto YouTube, and I actually took a video of this interview. So hopefully there will be clips from that as well. So thank you all for listening and for being here. I hope you spread love today, tomorrow, every single day beyond that. And I will catch you all next Thrive Thursday.